Thank you. So, Dr. Brooks, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
And thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. So, let's just jump right into
We'll do it.
Okay. So, can you tell me, or give me a synopsis of what your book is about and how you were inspired to create this book?
Well, the book is about Lucile H. Bluford, who was a journalist for 70 years. She worked at the same newspaper for that amount of time. She was a pioneering journalist, an activist for civil rights as well as women's rights. And she led the trail. I mean, she was really a trailblazer in leading the effort to eradicate injustices, not only in the state of Missouri, but throughout the country as it related to civil rights and women's rights. And the book is based on her writings, particularly her news stories and commentaries over a 15-year period. From 1968, the height of the civil rights movement, to 1983, which was, you know, the second phase of the feminism movement. So it's a 15-year period, and over that 15 years, I analyzed 358 of her news stories and commentaries as they related to jobs and reproductive rights and some other issues like protest and solidarity, of all the issues that were going on during that time frame.
Nice. So, Miss Lucile Brooks, how is she an inspiration to you, and how does she reflect what you think is good social activism?
Let me digress for just a minute. I wrote the book because it was based on my dissertation here at Howard University. That was the other question you asked. And out of that emerged the book. And I think it reflects on myself as a media owner, as well as her accomplishments over all those years, that she first was a reporter, a managing editor, and then she went on to be the editor of the newspaper, and finally she purchased the newspaper. And I think what's, for me, it shows an African American woman who was not only a journalist, but who was a media owner of a weekly black newspaper, and she used the power of the press to tell her story. And that's what so many of us, and so many of you, as young journalists, need to be looking at in this whole new world of journalism, because there's so many opportunities to work for non-mainstream press. There's times where you can do digital news and blogs, as well as other stories that you might want to freelance and write. And it showed her inspiration that she could be involved in those kinds of issues and efforts during that time.
Absolutely. It's very important for us as well to get to know stories like that and just kind of use it as inspiration. So you also taught here at Howard, correct?
I did indeed. 2 different times.
2 different times.
You mentioned the earlier time in 2010 through 12. I taught an entrepreneur course here at Howard University. I'm sure many of you know about the CERC program. And I was the founding leader of the CERC program, the founding executive of that program. And it's communications and entrepreneurship. And the then dean of the school shared that she wanted to ensure that so many of you young people not only look at journalism as a career path, but there could be the entrepreneurship in journalism as a career path. So we launched the incubator, and I taught the entrepreneur course during that period of time to get it all started. But way back in the 90s, not too far back, I was also on faculty here and worked with News Vision. And created the putting that News Vision on the air here at the first time around at WHUT. Okay. So that was the first time around, and I taught a reporting class. I came in here, and I was still working in television news. I always taught throughout my professional career because I think it's important to give back. And so I decided that I would teach this reporting class, and then I came into a classroom the first day, and everybody, I looked at the book list and I'm like, you can't teach reporting out of a book. So I took News Vision and we created an on-the-job experience training program.
So you're also an alum of Howard as well.
Absolutely, and when I did that, then I went on and finished my master's degree back in the 90s and then came back some years later, which was a few years ago, and decided that I wanted to pursue a PhD. And that's when I finished my graduate work and did that. And my dissertation then was on Lucile Brooks, because I wanted to write about not only a woman who was a media owner who used the power of the press, but also on black feminism, because she was a black feminist, and talk about the oppressions and the experiences that she had over the years that she was writing.
So how has black feminism changed from when she was advocating for it and what it looks like advocating for it now?
I don't think that there has been much change, frankly, if you're asking my opinion. I think that black women have been overlooked, and certainly in scholarly research on feminism. I believe that black women have been also overlooked in the black press over the years. The problem has always been rooted in grassroots activism. We all know that we as African American women have been stereotyped, and in those days they called it double jeopardy because we were black and we were women. How much has really changed? Look at the Me Too movement. I think what's happening is that we are kind of revisiting some of that. Black women have always had a standpoint on the experiences and the issues that they have faced throughout their years, and whether it's as moms or professional women or career women. And what Lucile Brooks did is she used her feminist voice in those news stories and commentaries that she wrote about in the Kansas City Call, that weekly newspaper. And what I see now is black women are using their voice more, and continuing to tell their stories about injustices and oppressions, stories about sexual harassment in the workplace, stories about politics, and they're using their feminist voice to tell those stories in different ways.
So what does it look like for you, a feminist voice? What is that? How do you use your feminist voice?
I use my feminist voice in forms like this, and talking to young people, talking not only about the book and about trailblazers like Lucile Brooks, Ida B. Wells, Daisy Bates, black women who have told their stories through their own media vehicles like their weekly black newspapers. But I also use it in telling those stories in speaking events that I may have about the book, or even just on women becoming entrepreneurs and staying the course. Because we always look at that career, the career in journalism as a reporter, the career in advertising and marketing. And we need to also be looking further down the road. What's that next path for us as African American women? So I use it in a lot of different ways. I teach a course once a year because I don't have a lot of time at George Washington University on multicultural marketing, and I'm using my feminist voice there and teaching that course. And opening the eyes of so many young people about, what's really going on in marketing and advertising, and how multicultural marketing is no longer an option in this country. Multicultural marketing for brands, the big brands, it needs to be intentional. It's a necessity. And so I use it in so many different ways.
That's awesome. I commend you for that one.
Thank you.
Going back to your education really quickly, so you were at University of Washington?
I did. I started at the University of Columbia College and the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri.
Okay.
I did something that so many of us young people, we all can look back and say we did something stupid. Yeah. And I decided to get married at a very young age, and that didn't work, not that time. But that took me from the state of Missouri to the state of Washington.
Okay.
And I had my senior year to complete. And what I did is I asked the admissions there, oh my goodness, I'm going to transfer. Will I lose credits? And they said, no, you're coming from the University of Missouri and Columbia College, some of the best journalism schools in the country. So I didn't lose any credit. So I transferred my senior year, and I finished up there, and I started my broadcast career in Seattle, Washington as a reporter.
Nice. So what did you, like your comparison to attending a predominantly white institute and also attending in a historically black college, what did you gain from those types of settings?
I can say that attending a majority white institution was certainly a very much of a learning experience for me, because I was also, like Lucile Brooks, born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. And in those days during the 1960s, I grew up during the 1960s civil rights movement. So many of the stories that she told, I experienced during that time. And I can say that it was eye-opening for me, because Seattle, Washington, for those of you who don't know, has a very, very low population of African Americans. And I grew up in a predominantly African American city and environment. So it was adapting to experience of learning how to be an African American woman in an environment like that, competing in an industry that was very competitive in those days. I mean, we're talking about 3 networks compared to the proliferation of news that we have today. And then when I decided to go back and finish a master's and a PhD, it was just really important for me that I needed to look at an African American institution. I wanted to be around people who looked like me. I wanted to learn more about history about African Americans, and you do that at an institution like a Howard University.
Absolutely. So speaking of the talking about National Association of Black Journalists, you have received some awards from them.
I have indeed.
So how important is it for journalists like us to be a part of NABJ?
Oh, good question, good question. It is very important for you to be a part of the National Association of Black Journalists. I found NABJ when I was a senior at the University of Washington, believe it or not. Walking down the hall, looking up on a bulletin board, and there's a notice about joining this National Association of Black Journalists. Being in a city that had about 10% African Americans, I said, this is a good opportunity for me to get in, learn, meet other people who were doing the same kinds of jobs that I was doing. I got involved then as a student member of the organization in 1977. The organization was only 2 years old then. It had about 200 people that were members of the organization, and now we boast more than 4,000 black journalists across the country. It is very, very important for young people to get involved in NABJ for a number of reasons. We provide internship opportunities, scholarship opportunities. I created a program that's an on-the-job training program for young aspiring journalists who want to be reporters and anchors and photographers and editors in the business. And I created that program in 1990, and this year we will celebrate 30 years of that program, and we have thousands of journalists who have gone through that program, young journalists who are now in major positions at major networks and television stations across the country. So it is I'm very, very proud of that program. There's also so many ways that you can network and learning opportunities for each and every one of you. I could say this, my son grew up in NABJ, swore he would not be a journalist. You know, children just don't want to follow in their own parents' footsteps. My husband is a journalist. And he grew up in the organization, and every job that young man has had over 13 years, he's gotten at NABJ, because we also boast and have the largest media fair in the country, where all of the networks, major newspapers, as well as major television stations from across the country come, and that's where they source their young talent, whether they're on the air or in behind the scenes like he is as a producer. And I'm very proud of him. He's worked throughout the country for 13 years as a local news producer and executive producer, and now he is a producer for CBS This Morning with Gayle King.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So NABJ is the way to go, everybody.
It is.
It is. So before becoming the founder and president and the CEO of SRB Communications, can you tell me a little bit about what it was like being a journalist and being like a TV journalist, basically?
For me, it was a little bit different than it is for so many of you now. As I mentioned earlier, for me, we only had 3 networks then, CBS, NBC, and ABC. And those local affiliate stations, there were so very few of us on the air. I could say that in my first 6-7 years of being in newsrooms across the country, from Seattle to Dallas, Houston, Texas, I was either the only one in the newsroom, or only one of 2. And it's very interesting when you grow up and you work during the 70s and the 80s when that is occurring, because it's really tough to cover stories on the black experience, because you're always educating the team that you work with, your bosses, the sensitivities of covering African Americans, and of course they always want to send you out on the black story. And that's good. I mean, because I think we could tell our stories better than so many others, but we also know that we are capable of telling business stories and political stories, and you really had to fight for those kinds of stories. So you had to be strong-willed. It was important that you are always keeping abreast of what's going on in the world. And so many young people now, and I know so many of you are guilty of this, is that, and I said this to a young lady on my staff this morning. I heard her say something and I replied, "Oh, okay." I said, we were concerned about the weather tomorrow. And I said, we need to be making plans for that. "Oh, I didn't hear that." And what I'm saying that you're guilty of is not even reading the news or knowing about the news. And you must know about world affairs and news, because if this is the profession that you want to pursue, how will you know what's going on? How are you going to become a better reporter? How will you become more competitive than the next person? Because it's unlike when I grew up, when we as African Americans were a commodity and they could hire 1 or 2 of us. You know, there are thousands of young African Americans coming out of school, coming out of schools across the country in journalism, advertising, marketing, digital. So it's very, very important that you learn all of that so you can become a better journalist.
Awesome. So going back to your book.
Yes. And I have the book here.
Yep.
Just so everybody
can see
knows,
it.
I have the book here. It's called Lucile H. Bluford and the Kansas City Call. Clint Wilson was also a co-author. He contributed some to the book. He was on faculty here until he retired a couple of years ago. He was also the chairman of the journalism department, and he was on my dissertation committee. So Dr. Wilson has written 6 or 7 books on the black press. So it made sense for me, if I wanted some guidance, if I wanted some counsel, and to really, really get the word out there about the book, that I should get someone to work with me that could make this a better book. And Dr. Wilson was that person. And I am grateful to him for all of his work for that.
Absolutely. And you're a nominee, so it's
yes,
a
we
nominee
are.
for the NAACP Image Award.
Absolutely. I mean, that was just incredible. We got news last week that we are one of 5 nominees for the literary works. For the literary works category for the NAACP Image Awards, and there were thousands of entries for that. and we will be in Los Angeles on March 28th. March 29th, the pre-award show will be for the book category. And then on Saturday, March 29th, is the actual award ceremony. So we are very, very, very delighted about that, because here's how we look at it. We're a winner just for being nominated. I mean, it's such a prestigious national award, you know. We all know that we call the NAACP Image Awards the Black Oscars, and all of Hollywood would be there. So just to be there and to walk on that red carpet is going to be fantastic. Win or lose, we're a winner.
Right, and congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
Look out for that.
Thank you so much. And I do have, I also have for you a copy of the press kit that we have for the book.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Nice. Thank you. So, how has serving, you also served on a lot of boards as well.
Yes.
So how has serving for different boards that are directed towards like women and just politics in general, African Americans, how in journalism as well, shaped the way that you show advocacy?
It's really important in all of our careers to be advocates for something. And I think all of you know that. And for me, it has been advocacy for young aspiring journalists, as well as advocacy for minority and women business owners. That's so very important to me. Here's what I believe. The more you give back, the more you get back. And I always get my blessings, because I am constantly giving. And that's, you know, and just like I say, it's different for everyone. But for me, I have always looked at my service as part of my life, my legacy, and my career. It's just very important. So I serve on boards, journalism boards. Currently I serve as the chair of the Board of Visitors for Morgan State University's Global School of Journalism and Communications, where I'm working with young people, of course, and I'm helping to grow their scholarship programs, their internship programs, so that so young people can be able to get that experience that they need. And then there's also those local boards that, you know, that you really need to serve on. For us, it's certainly, and for me in particular, those minority and women, those boards that help grow minority and women-owned businesses, because we have our own set of struggles, we have our own obstacles, and it's important that we're out there networking, giving back, because that's how people learn and know about you. And I always tell people that it's you know, when we were coming up in the business of journalism, we were always told that it's about who you know. You have to know somebody if you're going to make it in this business. I tell people, and young people in particular now, it's not about who you know. It's about who knows you. So if anybody's going to know you, you have to be out there. You have to give yourself. You have to make sure you make the time. You have to go the extra mile, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind, because there's so many young people out there who want to do what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, lastly, before we get to the questions in the audience.
Okay.
So you just started creating your first book. So you've done quite a lot with that. But what can we expect from you in the future? Are you going to be writing more books, or what are you going to be doing?
Good question. You know, I look at my business. I look at the writing and the book. I look at my family. I love my family. I have my niece in the audience today. She's a freshman here at Howard University from Los Angeles, and she has just transferred to the School of C. So I'm really proud of her.
Okay.
Yes, you can give her a little hand, because we're really happy that she's here. And, you know, for me, family, my spirituality, my business, my employees are first in my life. Because what I've learned is when you go to work every day, you have to have a work family, because you see them more than you see your own family. So I make sure that I want to see them grow. I want to see them, get the experience they need in my company so that they are able to move on to other companies. And I'm really blessed to have some of the best talent in this region working for me, and certainly in some cases in this country. So for me, for the future, I'm always working on my exit strategy for business. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean I'm going to retire. That doesn't mean that I'm going to just sell the business outright. What it means is that I want to be able to leave a legacy in the business, and I want to be in a position where I am not doing the day-to-day work, but that there's some talented number 2, number 3 on my staff that can take the business and run with it, and I can kind of step back or step aside so that I can rest a little bit and just advise and counsel. I could play more golf. I can get to Florida more often. I could see my family more often. Am I going to write some more books if that opportunity comes up? I certainly will. I would love to write the book about black women and entrepreneurship and talk about some of the obstacles that I've faced and give some advice to some other African American women who want to be entrepreneurs, because so many times we don't share and tell our stories. We tell the good, but we don't tell the bad. And I think the good and the bad need to be told together, particularly when you're talking about being an entrepreneur. Everybody looks back and says, oh, you're so successful. You have this large business. You have all of these employees. Well, there are tough times. There have been times over these 29 years where I woke up and didn't know how I was going to meet payroll. There have been times during the recessions when I woke up and we had lost several millions of dollars overnight. So the good times come with the bad times. There are peaks and there are valleys. And I think that we, as African American women entrepreneurs, need to be able to tell that story so we can help the next generation of women.
And I think that's very important to just get a message to everybody out there, like, especially as young people, we don't really focus on how our lows can help us too.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You have to crawl before you walk. Sometimes you have to have those struggles before you have the triumphs.
Thank you. And you deserve, playing more golf. You've achieved a lot. You've achieved a lot.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to transition to questions in the audience.